My guest today knows how to blend the worlds of classical and jazz guitar like none other. One of the finest guitar players in Europe, always exploring, always finding new ways to discover his instrument and music in general. He hails from a very musical family and never shies away from interesting collaborations. Welcome to this episode, Wolfgang Muthspiel.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. How are you doing?
Good, thanks.
Yeah?
Yeah.
You had a gig here
Fine.
yesterday. We're in a podcast studio, so very luxurious for me.
We are in the beginning of a tour with a new project. This one is with Lionel Loueke on guitar and Linda Mehano on bass. And I wrote a bunch of music, and we basically just played the second gig of yesterday that we ever played. And it's very exciting to explore the new music and find this chemistry between us. It's a project that I dreamed up without having played with them. But it really worked. It really works.
How important is, because I mentioned in the intro, you don't shy away from collaborations, right? How important is that to find new people to play with and find new perspectives also doing that?
Yes, I tend to kind of stick to a certain pool of musicians that I play with for long periods of time.
Yeah.
Which is also a huge benefit because you get to know them inside out, and you know, most of the times these are musicians that I'm really so curious about still, and it's a constant learning process for me to play with these people. That's, I think, kind of the beauty of our music, is that we are surrounded by. We're in a musical conversation with people that we're interested in, so we are very interested in how they will interpret the same situation that we're in. So in the ideal scenario, this is a two-way street. It's also the same with Lionel and me. You know, Lionel is this wonderful African guitar player, one of a kind, and very, very different from me. Couldn't be more different musically if you're thinking of maybe color or genres or something.
Yeah.
But there's so much common ground and so much attraction through these, through the fact that we're so different. So that's a beautiful thing, I think, because you can, of course, explore a lot on your own, by yourself, with your imagination, with your practice, with your, concepts. But a lot of the learning in jazz is really the experience of playing with people. Those years where I played with some masters stayed with me. Of course, I also went to universities and stuff, and I'm very academically trained, like most jazz musicians nowadays. But the real big lessons were always with musicians, mostly on stage.
But it seems like a very intimate thing to do also, that you have the standpoint, I kind of want to get to know you in this way. It's you have to be vulnerable yourself and able to do that in a two-way direction, I suppose, right?
I would say vulnerable is not the word I would use. I would say you have to be open to what kind of music might come out together, which might be different from what you thought.
Mm-hmm.
And in the moment, the music is leading somewhere. You gotta go with it. You could also stay with your idea of how it should go, and that could be a good outcome. But the real magic always happens in that second. Okay, this is interesting. Okay, this is a different way we're doing it now. And if all the great musicians I play with usually show me with notes, not so much with words. Yes. They see, yes, everybody says yes, and then the whole band is there. And these are things that are not really talked about. Many jazz musicians don't really want to talk about it. But they do it,
But that's, you have to, the word traveling comes to mind also. It's a little bit like traveling then, right? Seeing new things that you think, I couldn't have imagined this, but now I'm there. It's true, and it's there, and it's a new experience.
Absolutely. That's one side, is that you're seeking the new experience or open to the new experience. The other side is you gotta be there too. You
have something to give.
Whatever you bring, be there. You can all because this rhythm between your initiative and your reaction is the thing. If you only react, it's a little bit tiring for the others.
It's not a monologue, right? Yeah. Maybe we'll get to this later. I'd like to rewind and start in your youth. You're from Austria, a small town, Judenburg. That's your hometown, right?
Yes.
You came from a musical family. Your father was a composer too. Yet he ran a printing house, right?
Exactly.
So composing wasn't his full-time occupation then, right? So your brother, the trombonist, is also very musical and professional musician as well, right? What did it mean for your father to see that his sons went to become professional musicians?
Well, my father was basically a choral conductor who also composed, but he didn't consider himself a composer, but he considered himself very much a choral conductor. This choir was the heart of his musical life. And when he studied music, my oldest brother, Gerhard, was born, and he had to get a job that pays. So he had a whole career in another field, but his love was always in the music. And so we had we have 4 kids. 2 of my 2 brothers are all musicians, and his love for music was really conveyed to us in a very special way, because he didn't have to make money with it. So we only saw the passion of it. And it was not so much that he wanted us to become musicians, but it was so clear that was kind of in our family, that was the best you could do. That was higher ranked than being a doctor or whatever.
Yeah. It's actually interesting that you say that, because you can imagine it can be a goal to become a professional musician and all, but not having the pressure, or because there's a lot of pressure being a professional musician, right? The record labels and I don't know, all the stuff that can happen, and do I get gigs, and do I find people, and am I good enough, and all this. But if you just enjoy it without having to make money, it's actually sounds quite good, right?
Exactly. And we had to sort of find out later, when we actually became musicians, okay, we have to make money with it. But that was later, first it was only the joy of doing it and exploring it and, learning your instruments, but it was strictly classical. There was absolutely no other it was folk music from Austria and classical music. And we heard the big repertoire of the choral music, starting from the fantastic Renaissance choir music that, some of the greatest music that was ever written. That was the main passion of my father. So we heard that a lot, and also we sang a lot in the family. So 4-part singing, that was something that we actually loved to do. And my father was good at arranging things in a way that, everybody can handle it.
So he wrote pieces, or
he arranged pieces for us.
Yeah.
And then also when we started to play instruments, like I could only play a few notes, but he would find a way that I could play with the others with these notes and stuff,
Yeah.
And so it was a very inviting move that he made, and I'm very grateful, because before you actually learn anything about theory or harmony, theoretically, as a kid, you learn a lot by singing. How does it feel to sing that second voice? Where's the tension? Without knowing the intervals, but you kind of
you're a blank canvas.
Yeah. And also the ear. gets big. And so that was basically the beginning that I still, in a way, you could say, draw from, because that music is, I can play those kind of changes of Renaissance music. I can improvise like that without ever having studied it.
Because it started so young.
It's in me.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Maybe because I talked to some players who started out really, or got to know music at a very young age. I think that's a huge advantage, right? If you learn that language, so to say, or get acquainted with those colors of music at an early age.
I think it's a huge advantage.
Yeah.
I started with violin, and then with 13 or 14 I changed to guitar, and then later I discovered jazz. So that whole language I had to learn much later. I didn't have any idea about it, but I did have an idea about improvisation, because my brother Christian and me, we had sort of a project together where we just would improvise and play together with every instrument we found at home, and all gadgets and whatever. And there was a lot of improvisation, but we didn't know that jazz exists. But we, like kids play, you make up stuff. So
you invented your own jazz.
Yeah, in a way, it's in terms of free playing, that was already there, but we didn't have any idea about the history of jazz or what that is about. So that was something that I discovered later, and then felt, okay, I really have to make my homework now because I don't know anything about this. So I went all the way to that world. That's also why I left Austria and went to the States, because I wanted to immerse myself in that.
But how did you find out about this other world, which is called jazz then?
My brother brought a record home that was so wild, for me at the time, wild, ugly sounding chaos, but he kept playing it, and we were kind of puzzled, but we were also fascinated by this raw rhythmic joy, very different energy than classical music. And then we got into it, and very soon we were totally hooked, and we kind of discovered it together. So we showed each other, oh, I found this and I found this, and what do you think he's doing there? And so that was a beautiful trip. First I studied classical guitar, but a few years later I added the electric guitar, and then I also studied jazz in Graz, in this jazz department in the High School of Graz, where we had a great, very original guitar player who was my teacher. I'm not sure if you know him. His name is Harry Peppel.
I know him.
It's an amazing guitarist who was especially deep in the rhythmical sense. He had a project with Jack DeJohnette. He actually talked about Jack a lot. And he was, there's some great recordings of him with Liebman and many other players. And he was a big inspiration, because he embodied this other world that is not, because I was already, pretty fluent on the classical guitar and played Bach and stuff. But what he did was just, play a groove and the same thing for 2 minutes. And I kind of felt what that means. That the hypnotizing dance on a beat, which is something that doesn't really exist in classical music. So that whole world was super fascinating to me.
I can imagine, because both in the classical music and in jazz, you have to really be in the moment, right? Because if you play a piece with all the dynamics of classical music, you have to be there, right? But in jazz, you have to be there, but in such a different way. I can imagine that opened a huge perspective for you, like worlds to yet to discover, right?
Absolutely. And it also opened up a big field that I had to just learn, So as soon as I found out that this is sort of the core of everything in jazz, I I started to work hard on these aspects, because other things came easy to me that didn't. So then a lot of practice with time and using all sorts of tools and metronome and loops and finding out my tendencies in rhythm and how does it feel when I comp for somebody. So I would, comp a few choruses in a loop and then play over it, see how that feels. And, so it was a lot of late homework. And it's also why it's so fascinating to me now to play with these rhythmical masters like Lionel or Brian Blade or people like that. It's so nice, to feel that I can be in a conversation, in a joyful conversation with them about time. Mm-hmm. This is beautiful.
So at one point you felt I need to broaden my horizon and go to the States if I want to make more steps towards whatever. Can you elaborate a little bit on how that process went of moving abroad?
Yeah, okay. I was in Graz and I was already playing with bands, and I was studying there, and I studied both classical and jazz. And then we had this repertoire ensemble where we played standards. And in the beginning of the year, we got a tape, with this original recordings of the standards. And then we went to this repertoire ensemble, and it never sounded anywhere close to that thing that was on the tape. Mm. Not even close.
In a bad way.
Yeah, like that's not it, I thought, And at some point, one very nice, helpful, supportive teacher said to me, now you got to go now. This or next year, go. This was the first time that came to my mind. And so then I looked at the schools and who's teaching where. And then I saw that in Boston, New England Conservatory, Mick Goodrick is teaching guitar. And I had heard Mick in the bands of Gary Burton and, together with Pat Metheny, who was my absolute hero. And then I found out that Mick had taught all these other great guitar players. And so I applied to that New England Conservatory, both as a classical guitarist and as a jazz guitarist. And I was lucky that the two teachers met and had a conversation about me, because both of them the classical guy got the classical tape, and so then said, okay, we got to get these guys over. They made a very great offer for me to be able to go there.
For them, it must have been interesting too, because they probably don't. There's not that many students who come really from both those worlds like you did, right?
I think that's pretty rare, because it also involves really different techniques, and it's really a different instrument.
Yeah.
But anyway, that was my luck at the time, that they were, open to me doing both, because some classical teachers are not amused sometimes when they do other things. Anyway, Mick, I met Mick then, and Mick became my guru. He was my big teacher that I searched for and found. And we had such an intensive, fantastic time together. 2 years of learning, and then a lot of playing, a lot of duo playing in clubs around Boston. There's actually one record where it's documented, our duo. Yeah, and he was the one who really opened up a lot of stuff on the guitar for me. Also conceptually. Also kind of put me on a path to my own thing, away from sounding like other people, because at the time I was sounding very much like Pat.
That's what he told you, right?
Yes.
After he heard you play,
yes,
you sound exactly like
Pat.
Yeah,
first lesson. We play, I'm pretty confident at the time, and yeah, great. And then he said, yeah, you sound exactly like Pat. And that was it. That was the lesson.
Yeah, it's interesting,
and
because
so it's good, it's not no sugar coating.
No.
Yes, but we can do this and that. No. let's let it sit, and so we found very practical ways to get away from certain, automatic things that I did, sort of mimicking a Pat. The thing is, I sounded like Pat, but I had never transcribed Pat or anything. But I love Pat so much, and I still do. And it was just my absolute first jazz guitar inspiration.
But there's so much in that remark, because you can consider that as a compliment too, right? I mean, because Pat Metheny obviously is a great player, but he was probably also trying to tell you, like, you can sound like you.
Exactly.
Too. Yeah.
Exactly. And so that was a very important first lesson. But also there was other things like, Mick was a teacher that was very unusual in his ways of teaching. It was more like a Zen master.
Mm-hmm.
He would often tell you things that you don't understand right away. He would set you on a path, and then maybe 2 weeks later you might find out something, It is not that kind of teaching where you do this and then you get that, and then you do this and you can do that, and then, because that's not how music works.
Yeah.
And he was I think all his talents, he had huge musical talents, but all his talents, and then his philosophical side and his intellect and also his mathematical brain combined to be this teacher. So he was really that teacher.
It kind of reminds me, Scott Henderson told me that he had Joe Pass and Pat Martino as teachers, and the one was very, you just watched him play and you learned the skills and whatnot. And the other told, I think it was Pat, he was mentioning, saying, you have to go outside and look at the stars and kind of feel this and that.
Yeah.
A little bit like you're describing Mick Goodrick right now. Like there's feeling involved with it.
Feeling and also thought, like to be, I think it comes down, now in hindsight when I think about it, it comes down to the basic fact that you make choices all the time. And nothing is automatic. You think so. You think that's how life goes, but you always make choices every time. And he just wanted awareness that I make the choices I want. And of course, there's tools involved. Like we do have to learn the scales. They're very important, but how do you learn them? And he, for example, he had a beautiful way to teach scales. Your podcast is called 60 Scales and the Truth.
Exactly.
And the way Mick, this is really heavy because it reminds me very much of Mick, this sentence.
Mm-hmm.
He would teach the scales. He suggested a method where you record a background music on your instrument that expresses the scale. The background music could be in time or rubato or whatever. Could be played by, whatever instrument you play, or you could even write it for somebody. But it's important that this background music has all the notes of the scale in it. And it should be rather long and repetitious. And then you play over it with on only one string.
The Unitar.
Yes, the Unitar. And meaning you can't really be playing anything virtuosic, and you will feel the half and whole steps, and you will soak up the energy of the scale, because each scale, of course, is completely different. If you feel it, if you see it as a color, it's very different. Aeolian is a very different color than Dorian, and it's only one note, half note different, but it's such a different world. And once you get that planet, okay, this is that. Once you have that in you, you will always recognize it. It's like you don't, I won't confuse you with another person. This is once you understand the scale in that way, you will always hear it. And so then you do like a week on that scale with all the strings, and you make different compings, which is also a great way to learn the scale, because when you have to make the comping, you have to explore the harmonic possibilities that are in the scale.
Mm-hmm.
It's a great approach to learning the essence of a scale, because in the beginning for jazz musicians, this is a very confusing topic.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you just look at it sort of mathematically, they are pretty much similar, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But if you receive them as an energy, they are completely different from each other.
It's very interesting what you're saying, because it kind of reminds me that you have to implement those feelings, so to say, within your gut feeling. People have, I think, very good gut feelings. If you strip down all your thoughts, we feel, do I trust this person or not? And what Julian Lodge also told me, like what's very important in my music is it true? Or is it not true? Is it true? If you implement all those skills in your gut, you can tell, is it true? And then you can make those choices you mentioned, right?
Exactly. It's like the colors on the palette of a painter. You have to know your reds.
Yeah.
Then you can use it, And the whole thing about ear training, that's like a huge subject for us jazz musicians, is that you can recognize a sound before you can name it.
Mm-hmm.
You hear something and you know what it is, but you don't have time to think this is like E flat, Lydian, whatever. You could, stop and say that, but in the moment it's just you hear color and you know what it is, or you know at least some of it.
Mm-hmm.
Very, very interesting musical situations are when you are on your horizon of what you can hear, and you hear some of it, but not all.
Mm.
And that's, when you're in a more challenging jazz context, that happens all the time. This is very interesting. So you kind of know some of it, but some you also just have to kind of trust, or, also risk clash and, mistakes. And mistakes is the wrong word here, but, sometimes when you're in that territory, you cannot, if the territory is interesting, you cannot be sure all the time.
Yeah.
You could also make the territory less interesting than you're always sure. And, but in jazz, usually what happens is that you try to go to that other horizon of your hearing. And of course, it has to be honest, because you can't pretend to hear more than you do. You can, but it's not going to sound good. So, yeah, it's an interesting...
So you had to learn to be uncomfortable too.
Exactly. That is something I'm still learning, because it is an important aspect of music. I personally like to be comfortable with bands and with music, but at the same time, if you want to go to the thing you don't know, you gotta make some steps that you don't know how they work, and who knows what comes out. Maybe that evening that song has this direction, and if you're open enough, in the next gig it's a completely different thing. Also, I would say it's almost like a mode of operation for jazz musicians to not be afraid to fuck up, to fumble. That's fine. Like too much perfection in music anyway, the ideal of perfection is kind of not very productive, even not only for jazz, it's also for classical music.
And I think for life in general.
Yeah, for life in general. And, we are used now to these poor classical musicians. They play these masterworks that everybody knows. And there have been like already 50 amazing recordings. And then they play in a concert house somewhere. And they just have to deliver and to transcend that pressure and come to your own version of that piece is such a huge act that I really admire. And some can do it, and that's a blessing. And others, are a little bit like show horses. So that's a thing one has to sort of transcend in oneself. Is your own work. It is also for me, like the two poles, one being competent, delivering, smooth. The other pole is, let's see what happens.
Yeah.
So,
hey, but you mentioned like you did a comparison of scales with colors. Then there's and you mentioned choices. Mm-hmm. Then there's also the choice of to play or not to play.
Oh yes.
Can you elaborate a little bit on your path on because the choice to not play can be difficult, I suppose, right?
And valuable. Yeah. Well, my story is very, very simple. I basically played a ton of notes, so many notes, as many as I could, basically. And then I recorded my early gigs, when I was like 18, 19 or something. And I listened back to it and I couldn't believe how much I played. I said, no, next time I have to play less, record myself again. It's like who wants to listen to this? I really didn't like it. Mm-hmm. I thought it was great when I was on the gig, but when I listened to it, I was like, my God. So it took me a long time to be able to control the density. I'm not saying you should always play less. Sometimes it's great to play a lot, but it's important to be in charge of what you want to do. So it was just a thing I had to get conscious of. And the guitar tends to be a very chatty instrument. It's kind of easy to play long lines. We don't have to breathe. It's physically on the electric guitar not very demanding. So yeah, there's a lot of notes usually played by jazz guitarists. And I just had to learn to be in charge of, when do I want to be dense and when do I want to be sparse. Also, that very much depends on the other musicians. Like a good comper, accompanying is kind of the highest art in jazz. And a good comper is always balancing that with the soloist and the drummer. Like he would create complexity and density in certain parts, and in other parts sit back or just support, catching some tendencies of the moment, supporting them, but letting the soloist finish that. It's such a high art. Mm-hmm. And so this is where all the ear training and all the things I talked about kind of come together. Because when you comp, you kind of know, if you play a song that has changes, kind of know which chord comes next. But depending on what the bass player plays and what the soloist plays, there's a million versions of that chord. And a good comper, adapts that depending on what he hears.
Hey, another important figure, of course, is Gary Burton in your career. I kind of forgot, what age were you when you started playing?
I think I was 23.
It's quite young, right?
Yes.
So what did it mean to you to step in that band?
It was just a huge gift. I mean, I had listened to his albums, of course. He was a big hero of me from Austria. And then listening to Gary with his bands, playing the music of Carla Bley, his collaboration with Steve Swallow, then his duo with Chick. And then in Boston, I got a call to the audition. It was actually 2 auditions. On the first one, I was kind of sick and played terribly. Got a second chance, and then I was over the moon to be in that band. And in that band, I also met Larry Grenadier, the bass player. He was also in the band, and Donnie McCaslin was the saxophone player. And yeah, it was amazing because I was studying, and at the same time, I was playing with Gary, touring in the States, and listening to Gary every night, And he was a very generous person that, it was a great experience for young musicians to be in that band. So I really enjoyed it, and it was 2 years of that.
We talked about your father in the beginning. I'm kind of intrigued. You're in the States, your career sets off, and did you reflect with your father about how your career was going, and what kind of advice did he give you as a parent?
Well, when we decided to go into jazz more and more, my father he didn't know anything about jazz. He didn't say don't do it, but he was like, for him, it's like it was always Mozart and Monteverdi and Bach. And I don't think he even know Coltrane, So it was like a learning process for him. And when he realized that we were serious, and when we had our first concerts, because I played a lot of duo concerts with my brother, he also played piano and synths, and we had loops and everything we could find. We used. I played violin also. He played also recorder. And then my father came to these concerts, and he kind of got into it. And he started to listen to some other music. And it was very sweet because he was coming backstage, and he would kind of deliver a short summary of his experience. Not too long, but it was very important to him that he said something concrete other than, yeah, you did well or something.
Mm-hmm.
It was very moving because he tried to understand that world.
Oh, yeah.
And then basically we were kind of set on our paths, and there was not so much communication later. I mean, he was proud that we do our thing, but it was not like the time for the advice in musical terms was earlier.
I looked at the homage you kind of did, Super 8.
Thank you so much for bringing up all these things.
Yeah, because it's video, old videos from your family.
Yes.
And you and your brother made music to that. It's a very intimate thing to see, and also you see how much how important music is, of course, and it's a very. I never saw anything like it before, so I liked a lot.
Thanks for mentioning that. That's not very very known, this project, but was a beautiful thing from the Swiss TV. A great director wanted to make a movie about us, and he used the archive of our Super 8 films, family films that my father had made, and we gave him all the movies, and he cut these little video clips to the music we had made in homage to our father. And on that record, Early Music, we always use a little sample of the choir of my father, and out of that sample we make the piece. And then this director made a video clip from the archive of so it's all family.
Yeah. You watching trains and swimming in the lake.
Yeah, and the old style filming, and everybody's always in order of size, and everybody goes up the mountain, and it's very much something actually that was very meaningful to our family.
I can imagine.
Not only my brother and me, but also my siblings and my mom, and that meant a lot for us, because you kind of get an outside view, an artistic outside view.
Mm-hmm.
It's very moving.
It's a document, so to say.
It is.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah.
So I can imagine, like, every album you make in some perspective is, of course, a document of an era.
Exactly.
You just before we started this chat, you gave me a copy of your latest album, Etudes, Quietudes. Before we wrap this conversation up, I'd like to talk about the concept of that album as well, because song titles like triplets and arpeggios and tremolo.
Mm-hmm.
I can imagine you kind of try to discover what you could do with all those terms, so to say. Or can you elaborate a little bit on what was behind making that album?
Okay. Basically, when you are a classical musician, it's very clear what you practice. That's not so clear in jazz, but in classical music, it's very clear. And the type of etudes that I learned when I was 15, I still play. Still the same, this arpeggio, this scale, blah, blah, blah. And I love it. It's like backhand, millions of backhands. It's like that, But at some point, I got a little tired of the actual musical meaning of some of those etudes. And I started to write myself etudes for certain technical things. Then some years passed, and then I got reminded on this idea and had fun with composing etudes. I like the challenge of the restriction of that it has to be an etude, has to kind of deal with one technical or musical element. And then all these etudes came out. And it was a challenge. It was a beautiful challenge to write them, also, to practice them, because I want to play them. So this whole thing became this album, Etudes, Quietudes, and I now play quite a few solo concerts where I play all of them. It's 11 etudes, and the whole cycle lasts half an hour, and I connect them with free improvisations, using also loops and all sorts of things. So it's a whole concert evening now.
So did you, because if you were on that quest of etudes, it's an exercise, like you said as well, but where does the feeling enter this whole
it enters in the very first note. And also it enters in the composition process, because I didn't want to just write an exercise. I wanted to write a concert piece that is an etude.
Yeah.
Like the Chopin etudes or the Ligeti etudes, And I liked, even some of this music is actually quite romantic, you could say. But I like the technical term etudes.
Yeah.
But it's really just pieces for the written to be played for an audience.
It's quite a mind-blowing album, I have to say.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful music. Hey, and tonight you play in Amsterdam again with Lionel. I'd like to have him as a guest some other time.
Yes.
What? Because you played 2 gigs with him now. Can you tell me what did he give you thus far? There's yet to be things to discover, I suppose, but
I can only say that I feel him as my brother from the very first time I met him. And we also share the experience of having Mick as a teacher. He much later than me. He's younger. And Lionel, has in him a universe of rhythm that is absolutely endless. This is Africa.
Yeah.
This is a completely different thing. And he brings this wonderful universe to jazz, which is a gift. And it's just a privilege to be around him.
Thank you for this conversation.
Thank you.
It's like an improvisation always. Thank you, Christian Muthspiel, and listeners
Wolfgang.
also. Wolfgang,
It happens.
I messed up. And listeners also, thanks.
All right.
For listening.
Take care. Thank you.
Thank you.